The river glistened beneath the early morning sun, its calm waters hiding the chaos soon to erupt upon its banks. Both armies knew the river was more than a geographic boundary. It was a line between survival and defeat. Whoever controlled the crossing would seize the upper hand in the campaign. On one side stood Commander Viktor Sokolov of the Red Army, a man hardened by years of brutal war. On the opposite bank, Colonel Heinrich Weber of the Wehrmacht tightened his grip on the binoculars, scanning for weaknesses in the Soviet lines. Both leaders knew the coming battle would demand not just brute strength, but cunning strategy. Across the river lay destiny, and neither side was willing to yield. The river stretched wide, about 200 meters across, its current swift from the spring melt. The Soviets had erected makeshift defenses along the near bank, trenches, sandbags, and camouflaged gun nests. Yet, the true challenge lay not in holding their ground, but in finding a way to cross. Viktor stood among his officers, hunched over a crude map scratched in dirt. "The enemy expects us to attack head-on," he said. "They believe we will throw men and rafts against their machine guns. But we will not give them the satisfaction of slaughter." A young lieutenant, anxious but eager, leaned forward. "Then how do we take the far side?" Viktor's eyes narrowed. "By making them see ghosts." As night fell, Soviet sappers prepared decoy rafts stuffed with straw and helmets. At midnight, these would be released downstream, illuminated by burning torches, drawing the enemy's fire and attention. Meanwhile, under the cloak of darkness, the true crossing would take place a mile upstream, where a bend in the river offered cover. Across the river, Weber sensed something was coming. He had studied the Soviets too long to underestimate them. "They will not simply rush," he told his officers. "Watch the flanks, the currents, the shadows." His men, dug deep into fortified bunkers, felt the weight of the night pressing down, their nerves stretched thin by silence. At 23:55, the first Soviet shells screamed into the sky. Explosions tore across the German bank, showering earth and fire. Weber barked orders, rallying his troops. When the flaming rafts appeared on the water, his machine gunners unleashed a storm of bullets. The air was filled with crackling fire and shattered wood. But in the chaos, Viktor's true plan was already unfolding. A mile upstream, Soviet engineers dragged assault boats silently into the river. Viktor himself was among the first to step aboard. The current tugged hard, the boats bobbing dangerously, but the soldiers paddled with grim determination. Each splash was muffled under the thunder of artillery. Halfway across, a flare arced into the sky, bursting white against the black canvas. Weber's sharp eyes caught movement upstream. "There!" he shouted. The trap was revealed, but precious minutes had been lost to the decoy. German mortars roared, shells plunging into the water. One boat vanished in a geyser of fire and spray, screams echoing into the night. Yet the others pressed forward. Soviet machine gunners, positioned on their own bank, laid down suppressive fire, forcing German heads low. Viktor's boat struck the far shore. Leaping into waist-deep water, he dragged his rifle and shouted, "Forward for the motherland!" His men surged, hurling grenades into bunkers. Flames erupted, and the cries of wounded Germans pierced the smoke. Weber rushed to the sector, pistol in hand. His voice cut through the cacophony, "Hold them at the water's edge!" The Germans, disciplined and relentless, counterattacked with bayonets and close-quarters ferocity. The shoreline became a cauldron of steel and blood. For an hour, the two sides clashed in a storm of violence. The Soviets gained a foothold but risked being thrown back into the river. Every meter was bought with lives. As dawn approached, Viktor unveiled the second part of his plan. Hidden artillery, dragged into position overnight, opened fire from the Soviet side, pounding German rear positions. At the same time, a second wave of Soviet troops crossed the river, bringing heavier weapons. Machine guns and anti-tank rifles soon supported the beachhead. Weber's lines began to waver. His reserves were thinning, his bunkers shattered. Yet he fought with fury, rallying his men again and again. Smoke stung his eyes, but he refused to abandon the riverbank. At 7 o'clock, the climax came. A German counterattack, supported by a lone Panzer IV that had clawed its way to the front, struck the Soviet beachhead with brutal force. The tank's cannon thundered, blowing apart cover and scattering men. Viktor, ducking behind a shattered log, saw the tide turning against him. He clenched his teeth. If the tank was not stopped, the crossing would fail. Grabbing a satchel charge, he crawled forward through mud and blood, shells bursting around him. His soldiers covered him with suppressive fire, buying precious seconds. Weber, from a distance, saw the lone Soviet officer darting toward his tank. "Kill him!" he roared, but the fog of war swallowed his command. Viktor reached the panzer's flank. Rising to his feet, he hurled the satchel charge onto the tracks and dove into the mud. A deafening explosion rocked the ground, the tank shuddering before collapsing in flames. The Soviet troops erupted in a roar of triumph. The destruction of the panzer broke the German momentum. Soviet reinforcements surged forward, overrunning the battered defenders. Weber, pistol empty, fought until the last moment before being dragged away by his surviving men, retreating deeper into the forest beyond the river. By noon, the battle was decided. Smoke curled across the river, now littered with wreckage and bodies. The Soviets had secured the far bank, their bridgehead expanding by the hour as pontoon bridges were erected. Exhausted, Viktor stood among his men, mud and blood caked on his uniform. He gazed at the river, once a barrier, now a symbol of victory hard won. "The river no longer divides us," he said quietly. "It carries us forward." On the other side, Weber regrouped with his remnants. His eyes burned with frustration, but deep down, he knew the battle was lost. "They outthought us," he admitted to himself. "And they paid in blood to prove it." The river had been crossed, not just in geography, but in the will of men. For the Soviets, it was a step closer to victory. For the Germans, it was the beginning of retreat. The battle strategy across the river had succeeded.